When we look back at the Nazi regime, many people ask how highly educated and capable individuals carried out such terrible acts. Were they brilliant minds used for evil, or were they simply cruel people? Today, we're taking a closer look at a part of World War II history that many overlook, the real measured intelligence of Nazi Germany's top figures. What you're about to learn may surprise you. Some of the most violent and ineffective Nazi officials scored extremely high on intelligence tests, while others who appeared strategic turned out to have only average scores. This raises important questions about the difference between intelligence and morality, and between being clever and being wise. So how do we know their IQ results? Near the end of World War II, many senior Nazi leaders were captured and tried at Nuremberg. During the psychological and legal evaluations, the United States Army gave IQ tests to the accused. These tests were overseen by American psychologist Gustav Gilbert, who had unusual access to the prisoners. He wanted to understand the thinking of the men responsible for genocide and a continent-wide war. But not every Nazi leader lived to be tried. Adolf Hitler, Heinrich Himmler, Joseph Goebbels, and several others died in the last days of the conflict. For them, historians and psychologists rely on posthumous estimates drawn from their education, writings, speeches, and recorded actions. While not as strong as direct testing, experts generally view these estimates as reasonably accurate. It's important to remember that IQ tests have their limits. They focus on certain kinds of analytical thinking but don't measure emotional intelligence, creativity, wisdom, or moral judgment. Someone can score very high on an IQ test yet still make terrible choices or show no real empathy. The Nazis are one of the clearest examples of this reality. Now that we have that context, let's look at Nazi leaders ranked from the lowest to the highest IQ and see what these scores reveal about the Third Reich's leadership. Julius Streicher, IQ 106. At the bottom of the list is Julius Streicher, the fiercely anti-Semitic publisher of the Der Stürmer newspaper. His IQ of 106 put him only slightly above the average score of 100. This placed him in the 66th percentile, meaning he was smarter than about two-thirds of the general public, but not much more. Streicher was an elementary school teacher before joining the Nazi Party early on. He launched Der Stürmer in 1923, a hateful propaganda paper filled with crude anti-Jewish drawings and exaggerated stories meant to strip Jewish people of their humanity. The publication relied on shocking, graphic content and appealed to basic emotions rather than thoughtful arguments. Streicher's modest IQ was reflected clearly in how he acted. He was known for being vulgar even among Nazis. His speeches were basic and offensive. Other Nazi officials, including Hermann Göring, thought he was repulsive and humiliating to be associated with. Even Hitler, who defended Streicher for years because of his early loyalty, eventually saw him as too damaging to keep supporting. Streicher's lower intelligence compared with other Nazi officials helps explain why his propaganda lacked sophistication. He couldn't build detailed arguments, so he leaned on basic emotional triggers like fear, disgust, and sexual tension. Still, this rough style worked disturbingly well with parts of the public, showing that manipulation doesn't require high intellect. At Nuremberg, Streicher's testimony was unapologetic and strange, reinforcing the view that he was a man of limited ability who found a role in spreading hate. He was convicted of crimes against humanity and executed in October 1946. Ernst Kaltenbrunner, IQ 113. Next from the bottom with an IQ score of 113 is Ernst Kaltenbrunner, which many find surprising considering his position. This tall Austrian, standing 6 feet 7 inches with fencing scars on his face, became head of the Reich Main Security Office from 1943 until the war ended. This put him in charge of the Gestapo, the criminal police, and the SS Security Service. In effect, he stepped into Reinhard Heydrich's role after Heydrich was assassinated in 1942. An IQ of 113 places Kaltenbrunner in the high average range, around the 81st percentile. He was not lacking in intelligence, but for someone overseeing Nazi Germany's entire security system, including directing the final solution, one might have expected a higher level of cognitive skill. Kaltenbrunner had legal training, completing a doctorate in law at the University of Graz. Even so, his rise in the SS was driven more by extreme loyalty and harsh efficiency than true intellectual strength. Himmler chose him largely because he viewed him as manageable and unlikely to challenge his authority. During the Nuremberg proceedings, Kaltenbrunner tried to deny involvement in the Holocaust, despite being one of its main organizers. His defense was seen as weak and unbelievable. His moderately high intelligence simply wasn't enough to produce a convincing argument against the extensive records proving his role. He was found guilty and executed. Rudolf Hess, IQ 120. Rudolf Hess, Hitler's deputy until his unexplained flight to Scotland in May 1941, recorded an IQ of 120. This placed him in the superior range around the 91st percentile. He took part in the Beer Hall Putsch in 1923 and was jailed with Hitler in Landsberg, where he helped write Mein Kampf. His devotion to Hitler was intense and unwavering. As Deputy Führer, he was next in command after Hitler and Göring. But Hess's intelligence didn't translate into sound judgment. His solo flight to Scotland in 1941, aimed at negotiating peace with Britain, was seen by many as irrational. He parachuted into Scotland hoping to meet the Duke of Hamilton, believing he could negotiate a peace deal so Germany could focus fully on the Soviet Union. Hitler was said to be enraged and humiliated. The British simply detained Hess for the rest of the war. This odd event highlights the gap between intelligence and decision-making. Hess had the mental ability to plan and complete a demanding flight over enemy territory, yet lacked the insight to realize the mission was hopeless. At Nuremberg, Hess claimed he had lost his memory, though many believed he was pretending. His conduct during the trial was erratic. He received a life sentence in Spandau prison, where he stayed until his death in 1987 at age 93. The prison's last inmate. Walter Funk, IQ 124. Walter Funk, the Reich Minister of Economics and head of the Reichsbank, scored 124 on his IQ test, placing him in the 95th percentile. Funk was an economist and journalist before joining the Nazi Party. He became Minister of Economics in 1938 and President of the Reichsbank in 1939, overseeing the regime's economy and the financial exploitation of occupied lands. Under his direction, the Reichsbank accepted gold and valuables stolen from Holocaust victims, including teeth taken from murdered Jews. This made him directly involved in the genocide. Despite his higher intelligence, Funk was commonly viewed as weak and prone to heavy drinking. He was overshadowed by stronger figures like Göring and Albert Speer in economic matters. His testimony at Nuremberg was marked by sickness and emotional collapses. He was found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity and given a life sentence, though he was released in 1957 because of poor health. Konstantin von Neurath, IQ 125. Konstantin von Neurath, a veteran diplomat and Hitler's foreign minister from 1932 to 1938, scored 125, placing him just ahead of Funk. Von Neurath represented the older conservative class in Germany that initially believed they could guide or restrain Hitler. He came from Swabian nobility and had a long, respected diplomatic career before the Nazi period. He served as foreign minister partly to give the regime a respectable image abroad. But as Hitler pushed a more aggressive foreign policy, von Neurath began losing influence. In 1938, he was replaced by the more compliant Joachim von Ribbentrop. Von Neurath later served as Reich Protector of Bohemia and Moravia from 1939 to 1943, overseeing the occupied Czech regions. Although he was not as vicious as his successor Reinhard Heydrich, he still enforced repression and persecution of the Czech people. His IQ of 125 placed him in the superior range, which matched his diplomatic background. At Nuremberg, he tried to separate himself from the worst Nazi crimes, claiming he had acted as a calming influence. He was sentenced to 15 years but released in 1954 due to age and declining health. Alfred Rosenberg and Alfred Jodl, IQ 127. Two Nazi leaders scored 127, Alfred Rosenberg and Colonel General Alfred Jodl. Rosenberg was the party's main racial theorist and head of its foreign policy office. Born in Estonia to Baltic German parents, he studied architecture in Moscow before leaving for Germany after the Bolshevik Revolution. He was one of the earliest Nazi members and helped shape Nazi ideology, particularly its racial theories and anti-Semitism. Rosenberg wrote The Myth of the 20th Century, a heavy, poorly written work meant to give an intellectual basis for Nazi racism. It was so dull that even Hitler reportedly never finished reading it. Despite his IQ of 127, Rosenberg's ideas were confused and built on false racial science. During the war, he served as Reich Minister for the occupied Eastern Territories, overseeing harsh exploitation and mass killings in captured Soviet regions. He was convicted at Nuremberg and executed. Alfred Jodl, who also scored 127, was a very different figure. He was a career military officer and served as chief of the operations staff of the German armed forces from 1939 to 1945. Jodl was a capable military strategist who helped coordinate operations across all battlefronts. Unlike Rosenberg, Jodl was not driven by ideology but by his role as a professional soldier. Even so, he was responsible for signing unlawful orders, including the Commando Order, which demanded the execution of Allied commandos even when captured in uniform. At Nuremberg, he was convicted and executed, though some military historians still debate his sentence, arguing he followed orders rather than creating policy. Albert Speer, IQ 128. Albert Speer, Hitler's architect and later the Reich Minister for Armaments and War Production, scored 128 on his IQ test. This placed him near the top of the superior intelligence range at the 97th percentile. Speer is often viewed as one of the most complicated figures in Nazi leadership. Well-educated, polished, and charismatic, he joined the Nazi Party in 1931 and quickly became Hitler's preferred architect. He designed major Nazi structures and created the grand displays seen at the Nuremberg rallies. In 1942, after Fritz Tote's death, he became Minister of Armaments and War Production. His organizational skill and efficient management sharply increased German weapons output despite constant Allied bombing. Many historians believe Speer's work prolonged the war by at least a year. What makes Speer especially noteworthy is how he behaved at Nuremberg and afterward. Unlike most defendants, he accepted broad responsibility for the regime's actions but denied knowing about specific crimes such as the Holocaust. His legal approach was highly effective, making him the only top Nazi leader at Nuremberg to escape execution or life imprisonment, receiving a 20-year sentence instead. After his release in 1966, Speer published several books portraying himself as a good Nazi, a technical expert who claimed to be unaware of the regime's worst crimes. This image has been heavily disputed by historians, who have shown that Speer almost certainly knew about the Holocaust and used slave labor from concentration camps. His high intelligence helped him construct a polished, self-serving story that brought him wealth and a measure of public acceptance after the war. Joachim von Ribbentrop and Wilhelm Keitel, IQ 129. Scoring 129, just above Speer, were two men often seen as among the least capable Nazi leaders, Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop and Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel. Von Ribbentrop had been a wine merchant who connected himself to Hitler through social circles. He had little real diplomatic experience but impressed Hitler with his foreign contacts and supposed expertise in international affairs. Hitler appointed him foreign minister in 1938, replacing Konstantin von Neurath. Ribbentrop's most notable accomplishment was negotiating the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with the Soviet Union in 1939, enabling the invasion of Poland and the start of World War II. But he was widely disliked by Nazi officials and foreign diplomats for his arrogance, vanity, and lack of skill. His IQ of 129 puzzles many historians because he showed almost no practical judgment or diplomatic ability. Perhaps his intelligence showed more in cunning and social climbing than real diplomatic skill. At Nuremberg, he remained loyal to Hitler, was convicted, and executed. Wilhelm Keitel, also scoring 129, was chief of the Armed Forces High Command throughout the war. Despite his top role, Keitel was seen as Hitler's yes-man, earning the nickname Leotil, a play on the German word for lackey. He signed numerous criminal orders, including the infamous Commissar order targeting Soviet political officers and naval decrees against resistance members. At Nuremberg, he claimed he was just following orders but was convicted and hanged. Both men show that high IQ does not guarantee competence in leadership. They could perform well on tests but lacked wisdom, judgment, and moral courage. Dr. Joseph Goebbels, Reich Minister of Propaganda from 1933 to 1945, never took a formal IQ test because he died in the final days of the war. Experts estimate his IQ at around 130 based on his education, writings, and documented skills. Goebbels earned a doctorate in German philology from Heidelberg University with a dissertation on 18th-century Romantic drama. He was widely read in philosophy and literature, considered one of the most intellectually capable Nazi leaders. As propaganda minister, he was devastatingly effective, understanding mass psychology and manipulating public opinion through film, radio, rallies, and print media. His propaganda methods are still studied today as examples of influencing public opinion, though as cautionary tales. Goebbels was a skilled speaker and writer. His diaries, spanning thousands of pages, reveal a mind capable of self-reflection and analysis even while committing monstrous acts. He helped organize Kristallnacht in 1938 and escalated Jewish persecution during the war. An IQ of 130 places him at the very superior level, the 98th percentile. His calculated evil was chilling. On May 1, 1945, after poisoning his 6 children, Goebbels and his wife committed suicide in Hitler's bunker. Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, commander of the German Navy until 1943, scored 134 on his IQ test, placing him well into the very superior range, the 99th percentile. Raeder was a professional naval officer, having served in World War I. He became head of the Navy in 1928 and secretly rebuilt German naval power, violating the Treaty of Versailles. He advocated a powerful surface fleet to challenge Britain, though Germany lacked the resources. His plan would have taken until 1944, but Hitler started the war in 1939. During the war, Raeder clashed with Hitler over naval strategy. He resigned in 1943 and was replaced by Karl Donitz. At Nuremberg, Raeder was convicted of crimes against peace and other charges, sentenced to life imprisonment, and released in 1955 due to ill health. His intelligence was evident in naval planning and strategy, even under an evil regime. Grand Admiral Karl Donitz, Raeder's successor and Hitler's chosen leader after his death, scored 138 on his IQ test, placing him in the 99th percentile. Donitz was a World War I submarine officer who specialized in U-boat strategy. As head of the U-boat arm and later the entire Navy, he came close to severing Britain's Atlantic supply routes during the Battle of the Atlantic. His Wolfpack tactics were new and highly effective until Allied technology and defenses improved. Donitz was a committed Nazi and a capable naval commander, a dangerous mix. When Hitler killed himself in April 1945, he named Donitz as his successor. Donitz formed a short-lived government and arranged Germany's surrender. At Nuremberg, he was convicted of war crimes connected to unrestricted submarine warfare, though similar methods were used by other nations as well. He received a 10-year sentence, the lightest punishment among the major defendants. His strong intelligence helped him present a defense that downplayed his role in the regime's crimes. Hermann Göring, IQ 138. Hermann Göring, Reichsmarschall and Hitler's chosen successor for most of the war, also scored 138 on his IQ test, matching Donitz. Göring was a decorated World War I pilot and one of the early members of the Nazi Party who took part in the Beer Hall Putsch. He held more titles than nearly anyone else in the regime: Commander-in-Chief of the Luftwaffe, Prime Minister of Prussia, Reichsmaster of Forestry, Reichsmaster of the Hunt, and numerous others. He was the second most powerful man in Nazi Germany for much of the period. Despite his high intelligence, Göring was corrupt, self-indulgent, and increasingly ineffective. As the war went on, he became addicted to morphine and amassed huge amounts of stolen property, taking art and valuables from across Europe. His Luftwaffe failed to win the Battle of Britain, failed to stop Allied bombing raids, and became a growing embarrassment. At Nuremberg, Göring was the highest-ranking defendant and acted with confidence. Even after detoxing from morphine in captivity, he was sharp and forceful. His exchanges with prosecutors became some of the trial's most memorable moments, as he argued aggressively and refused to admit guilt. Göring was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to hang, but he avoided execution by taking a cyanide pill the night before. His intelligence made him a threat until the end, allowing him to outsmart his guards and deny the Allies the public execution of their most famous prisoner. Arthur Seyss-Inquart, IQ 141. The highest confirmed IQ score among tested Nazi officials belongs to Arthur Seyss-Inquart at 141. This placed him in the genius range, higher than 997 out of 1,000 people. Seyss-Inquart was an Austrian Nazi who played an important part in the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria by Germany in 1938. He briefly served as Austria's chancellor before the country was absorbed into the Reich. During the war, he became Reich Commissioner of the occupied Netherlands. In the Netherlands, Seyss-Inquart oversaw harsh repression. He enforced anti-Jewish policies that led to the deportation of more than 100,000 Dutch Jews to extermination camps, including Anne Frank and her family. He also directed the forced labor of Dutch civilians in Germany and the large-scale theft of the nation's resources and cultural treasures. Despite his extremely high intelligence, or perhaps influenced by it, Seyss-Inquart was shockingly organized and precise in carrying out violence. He used his strong analytical skills to support mass murder and repression. At Nuremberg, he admitted to parts of his role more openly than many others on trial, but still expressed no sincere regret. He was found guilty and executed in October 1946. The fact that the highest verified IQ among Nazi officials belonged to Seyss-Inquart, and not to well-known figures like Göring or Goebbels, shows that intelligence is not tied to fame or even public impact. Seyss-Inquart was a cold bureaucrat who used his gifted mind to enforce policies that cost countless people their lives. Adolf Hitler IQ roughly 140 estimated. Finally, we reach Adolf Hitler. He never took any formal IQ test, as he died in his Berlin bunker on April 30, 1945. Still, several historians and psychologists have placed his IQ near 140, similar to Seyss-Inquart's score. These estimates come from several observations: Hitler's reputation as a powerful speaker and propagandist, his early strategic choices during the war, his broad reading on military and political subjects, and his ability to control and influence those around him. Hitler had no formal higher education but absorbed huge amounts of information in specific fields. He could recall technical details about weapons, naval strength, and past military campaigns. He was a forceful public speaker who could keep crowds focused for long periods. He outmaneuvered rivals with stronger academic backgrounds and secured full authority over Germany. But Hitler's intelligence was paired with disastrous decision-making. As the war continued, his choices became increasingly irrational. He ignored experts, relied on instinct or ideology instead of evidence, and pushed Germany toward total collapse. His racial beliefs were rooted in false science, no matter how confidently he defended them. Hitler stands as the clearest example that intelligence without judgment or morality leads to ruin. A score around 140 would classify him as gifted, yet he used his abilities to unleash a conflict that killed tens of millions and to direct a genocide of immense scale. So how did the intelligence of Nazi officials stack up against the Allied leaders? We can look at the approximate IQs of the three most influential Allied figures. Winston Churchill IQ about 150 estimated. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill is often estimated at around 150, placing him in a very high range. This estimate comes from his massive body of written work, his strategic thinking, his control of language, and his documented intellectual accomplishments. Churchill wrote extensively and earned the Nobel Prize in Literature. His published work spans millions of words across numerous volumes on politics, war, and biography. He was a powerful speaker whose words helped hold Britain together during its most dangerous period. He also showed long-term strategic awareness and identified the threat from Nazi Germany earlier than many of his peers. Still, Churchill made notable mistakes, including the failure of the Gallipoli campaign in World War I and several harmful colonial decisions. Like the Nazi leadership, Churchill shows that intelligence does not ensure flawless decision-making. Franklin Delano Roosevelt IQ around 140 estimated. U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt is believed to have had an IQ near 140, close to Hitler's estimated level. This estimate is based on his political talent, his ability to explain difficult issues in simple ways, his leadership of the largest wartime production effort ever seen, and his handling of complex global alliances. Roosevelt was a skilled statesman who won the presidency a record 4 times. He spoke to the American public through his fireside radio talks. He built the alliance that defeated the Axis while managing the tense relationships between the US, Britain, and the Soviet Union. The idea that Roosevelt and Hitler likely shared similar IQ levels near 140, yet used their abilities for completely opposite goals, shows that intelligence alone is neutral and can support either good or harm. Joseph Stalin IQ around 130 estimated. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin is often estimated to have had an IQ near 130, placing him at the lower end of the very superior category. Interestingly, Stalin banned IQ testing in the USSR in 1936, possibly because the concept clashed with communist ideas about equality, or perhaps because he didn't score as highly as he wanted. Even though he was possibly the least intellectually gifted of the main Allied leaders, Stalin was often the most ruthless and in some ways the most effective at securing his aims. He outlived repeated political purges, defeated rivals such as Trotsky, pushed the Soviet Union through rapid industrial growth, and turned the country into a major world power. Stalin demonstrates that intelligence alone doesn't define leadership. Strategic thinking, cruelty, and the ability to use fear can matter just as much as mental ability. So what does this all show? Intelligence does not stop someone from committing evil acts. Some of the most violent figures in history had extremely high IQs. Their intelligence increased the scale of the harm they caused. IQ doesn't guarantee skill or sound judgment. Von Ribbentrop had a score of 129, yet still failed at his job. Nazi officials made disastrous choices despite their high intelligence. Education didn't stop Goebbels and Rosenberg from adopting genocidal beliefs. The Allies did not win because they were more intelligent. They won through resources, location, and a moral purpose that gained public backing. Being intelligent is not the same as being moral. The most intellectually gifted Nazi leaders were still responsible for horrendous crimes. Their intelligence simply made them more capable of carrying out those crimes. Stopping future atrocities depends on moral teaching, empathy, and strong systems, not intelligence alone. Thank you for watching. If this was helpful, please like, subscribe, and share. Understanding history helps us see why these events occurred, so we can prevent similar tragedies in the future.